We look at the present through a rear-view mirror. We march backwards into the future. Suburbia lives imaginatively in Bonanza Land. Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Massage. Throughout history, the home has been considered a woman's place. In the US throughout the 20th century, concerted efforts were made to keep her there. Women were discouraged from pursuing academics, entering the workforce, and when they did get jobs, their employment was tenuous. Women could be fired for becoming pregnant or getting married, and men made their time at work miserable through relentless harassment. The message was clear: women should remain in the home. In her paper Embracing Gendered Space, Becca Schumann writes, "Female-dominated spaces exist, but female relationships to them are complicated. Firstly, unlike male-dominated spaces that were created and cultivated by men, female-dominated spaces are places given to them by men. They are told this is their designated space. Second, women have been told that the spaces they occupy best suit their nature as women, which limits their identity to better suit the needs of men. Last, female-designated spaces, like the home, contain a domestic knowledge that is considered gender-specific, unprofessional, and less important than the knowledge held in male-dominated spaces. This ensures that so long as women stay in their own gendered spaces, they cannot compete with men for privilege or a higher social status." Brian Forbes' 1975 film The Stepford Wives posits that the suburban home is an invisible cage to the women who live within it. The film opens with the picturesque family of four, Joanna, Walter, and their two kids, on the cusp of leaving their New York apartment for the idyllic Connecticut town of Stepford. The opening scene establishes the film's central conflict: men exerting control over the bodies of women, or bodies made to look like women.
Daddy, I just saw a man carrying a naked lady.
Well, that's why we're moving to Stepford.
But it also introduces another aspect of the film, the move from the city to the countryside. The 1970s were a period of rapid decline for New York City. Due to severe financial mismanagement, the city was in complete shambles and had begun to experience urban decay. It had lost the glowing, prosperous reputation it had had in previous decades and became known as a dirty, crime-ridden city. According to Jonathan Marler, the chronicler of The Bronx's Burning, the clinical term for it, fiscal crisis, didn't approach the raw reality. Spiritual crisis was more like it. Due to rising poverty and crime rates, but, more notably, an influx of Black and Latina migrants, affluent white people were leaving the city in droves. They went from making up 90% of the city's population in 1960 to 60% by 1980. This is an example of white flight, a phenomenon in which an increase in the black and brown populations of an area causes the white residents to move away, typically to the suburbs. White flight is an enactment of an incredibly common narrative we see play out around us all the time. In uncertain times, or in times when more social change is being made, members of the oppressor class feel threatened, and feel the need to aggressively reassert control. Racist white people feel unsafe around people of color, so they move away from urbanized areas. A man in the 1970s would have felt incredibly uneasy about the growing women's liberation movement, so they might have, for example, moved away from the city where their wife has feminist friends to a small, socially conservative town. This move to the suburbs was not just unique to New York. At this point in time, it had been happening all around the US and continued long after the 1970s. I'll quote Becca Schumann again. Connected to this domestic ideal was an exodus of families from the urban centers of production to the nearby growing suburbs. These suburbs were just close enough to the city so that the husband could have a comfortable commute to work, while the wife and children would be kept from the immoral, dirty hustle and bustle of urban life. The American exodus to the suburbs in the early decades of the 20th century also refocused the importance and significance of the home specifically. The suburban home did away with the formality of the country estates, placing more of an importance on happiness, personality, and comfort. A key feature of the home becoming a place that makes its inhabitants feel such things was the woman being at its center. Home is where the heart is, and where the woman is also. This idea that the city is a place of immorality is a long-standing trope that has wormed its way deep into people's conception of urban spaces, and is especially prevalent in literature and film. Conversely, the suburbs and the countryside are often thought of in a positive light, as safe havens of community and tradition. Small towns have always had a place in the conservative imagination. The first wave of feminism revolved around the issue of women's suffrage and their right to public life. By 1920, it was codified in the US Constitution that women were allowed to vote. So much had changed in the world by 1963, but the oppression of women inside the home and out was not one of those things. In her landmark text, The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan took a look into the home, the ways women were being subjugated in the private sphere. The titular concept describes the narrative sold to women by society that housewifery will fulfill them, that marriage, children, and a nice house in the suburbs would be enough substance off of which to build a life. But women across America found that something was wrong. I heard a mother of 4 in a suburban development 15 miles from New York say, in a quiet tone of desperation, "The problem." And the other mothers knew, without words, that she was not talking about a problem with her husband, or her children, or her home. Suddenly they realized they all shared the same problem, the problem that has no name. They began, hesitantly, to talk about it. Later, after they had picked up their children at nursery school and taken them home to nap, 2 of the women cried, in sheer relief, just to know that they were not alone. Just what was this problem that has no name? What were the words women used when they tried to express it? Sometimes a woman would say, "I feel empty somehow, incomplete." Or she would say, "I feel as if I don't exist." Sometimes she blotted out the feeling with a tranquilizer. Sometimes she thought the problem was with her husband, or her children, or that what she really needed was to redecorate her house, or to move to a better neighborhood, or to have an affair, or another baby. Sometimes she went to the doctor with symptoms she could hardly describe. A tired feeling. I get so angry with the children it scares me. I feel like crying without any reason. Women's mind-numbing, soul-killing dedication to the maintenance of the home, of ensuring that their families functioned in, is unwaged work that allows society and capitalism to run. Camille Vigneault writes in her essay Room for Women, "Thus it became essential to demystify the idea of housework as some kind of natural task assigned to women, and instead acknowledge the historical and political process that progressively confined and privatized domestic labor within the home." Many second-wave feminists did not enjoy the Stepford Wives. At a screening held just for women's libbers, there were apparently hisses, groans, and guffaws throughout the duration of the movie. Betty Friedan declared the film a rip-off of the feminist movement, despite the fact that her book was the basis for much of the feminist critique in Ira Levin's original novel. Screenwriter and film critic Eleanor Perry criticized the production for its overwhelmingly male above-the-line crew. The only credited women involved in the production of The Stepford Wives were Juliet Taylor, the casting director, and Romaine Green, the hairstylist. So it's safe to say that the vision of the film was driven and realized almost completely by men. And it's definitely fair that many feminists read this as undercutting the attempted progressive messaging of the film. Sexism is entrenched into every facet of Hollywood, and just because this was among the first films produced there depicting the women's movement and its ideas, didn't mean that there was any material change made for women in the industry. Linda Arkin stated, "It dumps on everyone, women, men, suburbia. It confirms every fear we've ever had about the battle of the sexes, and it says there is no way for people to get together and lead human lives." I think she must have been thinking of the final scenes, especially, which upon release were widely interpreted as anti-feminist. Joanna's death was read by many as an explicit statement in support of the death of second-wave feminism. Viewers in the 1970s were accustomed to a media culture overwhelmed by vitriolic sexism. It was normal for women in films and television to be insulted, debased, and sexualized constantly. Feminists who recognize this as harmful would have been hoping for feminist media that showed women fighting back against men and the patriarchy. So, when they saw Joanna killed and roboticized at the end of the film, the oppression they were trying so hard to combat was thrown back in their faces. A protagonist they identified with was coldly murdered, with no end to the cycle of violence in sight. The nihilism in the ending would have been very demoralizing, as many feminists would have wanted to be vindicated by the conclusion of one of the first films targeting them as an audience. A modern feminist audience comes from a media culture with a lot more explicitly feminist stories, and from a world where feminism, though often diluted or co-opted, is a much more ordinary and accepted ideology than it was in the 1970s. I think this would allow them to read the ending with some more nuance, not necessarily seeing Joanna's murder as the death knell for feminism, but as the depressingly mundane reality of life for many women under the patriarchy. The Stepford Wives had a minuscule budget, and while the exact figure is unknown, it's estimated to be around $500,000. The production company, Palomar Pictures, was in dire financial straits upon the release of the film. William Goldman, the author of the screenplay, stated that the film was probably released badly, as far as the people involved in the making of that movie are concerned. The best way to release it would have been slowly, praying for favorable word of mouth. Stepford got the studio some dollars. It was gone in a month, but it served the studio well. The film was in cinemas for about a month, and never really got off the ground. Palomar Pictures shuttered later that year in 1975, and their parent company, Bristol Myers Squibb, neglected the film in preceding years, allowing the tapes to sit untouched in its archive. Despite this mishandling of the film and its lack of discussion in modern-day film and feminist circles, its legacy looms large in our culture. The film's reception has definitely warmed among feminists, though it hasn't been completely embraced. The biggest criticism came of the film's failure to be properly intersectional. Feminist audiences aren't going to be happy with a story attempting to send a progressive message having such a narrow scope in its depiction of oppression. Because although The Stepford Wives is an excellent text on sexism, it fails to fully grasp the racial and class elements it could have also skewered. Reviewer Sally Jane Black writes on Letterboxd, "Everyone in this film is upper class, well-off, comfortable, the kind of petty bourgeois or outright bourgeois families that we're told are the American dream, and that fits into the commentary well. The discussion of a black family moving into town makes plain that the lack of black characters is an intentional move to represent the regressive, oppressive culture. But the film fails to examine the class element beyond positioning it as part of the lie. It shows how the free labor of women lets the men focus on their careers, but it fails to show the deeper connection, the massive profits made from their free labor, the weakening of men's ability to organize against bosses, the real working-class arguments for feminism. It's a little disappointing because of just how close they came to it." Throughout the film, Joanna and Walter's house is shown to be rather plain and conventional. All of its walls are painted white, except for the children's room, which is wallpapered. This is a very symbolic choice. The color white is strongly associated with the Stepford Wives. After becoming robots, their costuming is consistently white. This color has strong connotations of purity, cleanliness, and goodness, all of the things that the Men's Association want their wives to be. But in this film, it also signifies the cold lifelessness of conformity, of roboticism. The film was shot on location rather than on a film lot, as well as with a minuscule budget, as I mentioned previously. This means that the production team may not have had the funds to repaint the house, spending their budget elsewhere. Regardless of intention, the choice of white walls still has a lot of meaning within the film. The way the house is lit throughout the film also either really accentuates or downplays this numbing effect of the bright wall color. When there's a scene with Bobby or Joanna's children, the lighting is quite warm, giving a more domestic, human feeling. Conversely, in the scenes where Walter or the other Men's Association members are present in the house, the lighting is high-key, very intense, and neutral or cold in tone. This gives these scenes a dreamy, unsettling effect, while also exposing everything that's in the frame. There's no place to hide. It's also notable that there is hardly ever any natural light in these scenes. It's always nighttime, or not shown what time of day or night it is. Then there is the use of darker, more low-key lighting in scenes with Walter that foreshadows the evil that will come upon Joanna by the end of the film. For example, in this scene, lit by the fireplace, he tells her that he loves her. It is clear that he has just gone through with the decision to turn her into a robot. These conflicting motifs of daylight and darkness do run through the film. What is shown during the day is unsettling, but ultimately acceptable and normal in society. But what happens at night is closer to the truth, showing the harm that's really done to women behind closed doors. The final scene that takes place in Joanna and Walter's house shows a radically different version of the house compared to what we have seen so far. Forbes's use of framing in this moment is restricted, due to the fact that the film was shot on location in a real Connecticut house. There are only a few different places the camera can be put, resulting in the use of only 2 different shot placements in the beginning of this scene, cutting from Joanna's perspective of Walter to Walter's perspective of Joanna. This makes the cut to a side view more impactful when Walter attacks Joanna. The bars of the staircase are a critical part of this scene, fencing Joanna in. Her realization that Walter is a monster, someone who sees her as nothing more than a stubborn piece of property, reveals the house as having been a prison all along. Honestly, I didn't really have a conclusion or a nice little bow to wrap everything up with, but I hope I included enough production context.